So, as we know, we're going to have eggs, nests, and dinosaur behavior, evidence from the Morrison Formation, Colorado Plateau. And our speaker is going to be Dr. Jim Kirkland, who was born in Weymouth, Massachusetts, and a long time ago. He went to Marshfield High School, BS in Geology, the New Mexico Institute of Mining and Technology, MS Geology from the Northern Arizona University, and PhD, Geoscience University of Colorado. He's the Utah State Paleontologist with the Utah Geologic Survey over the past 26 years, permitting and promoting Utah's paleontological resources for the public good. After telling people he would be a paleontologist at age 5, see, everybody starts young, okay, he spent more than 50 years excavating fossils across the southwest U.S. and Mexico, authoring and co-authoring more than 100 papers in Mesozoic environments, biostratigraphy, biogeography, and paleoecology, naming 23 new dinosaur species, including the giant raptor Utah raptor, cool, and the best understood polycanthine and chylosaur, Gastonia, other tetrapods, many fossil mollusks, and fossil fish. He has shown that Grand County, Utah, uniquely preserves the 4 to 5 oldest Cretaceous dinosaur faunas in North America because of local salt-induced subsistence, which opened up the opportunity to study terminal Jurassic extinction for the first time. His researches in the lower Cretaceous of Utah indicate that the full opening of the North Atlantic was about 120 million years ago, and followed by 20 million years of North America's isolation as an island continent. Just lots of oceanfront property. And followed by 20 million years, and has dated the origins of Alaska and the first great Asian-North American faunal interchange at about 100 million years ago. So that's cool. Thank you, Dr. Kirkland.
You know, I guess I can hand this off. Well, this is...
Can I just, if anybody online has questions, if you could please put them in the chat.
Basically, this is really kind of coming around full circle because I talked about this area, the Fruita paleontological area, when I came and gave a lecture when I was applying for this job, when I made the short list. So, a lot of this work, not all of it, but a lot of this work is based on things that I was doing during the 90s. So 35 years ago to 30 years ago in that time frame. So some of this is old school, but they wanted me to give a talk in a few weeks, been pretty busy. So I said, well, I got this in the can, and I've never given this talk in Utah. I have given it in other states, but not in Utah. So I'm going to present it to you. I'm giving it next week in Alberta, via Zoom. But anyway, which arrow? I'm hoping for the best. Oops, dang. Okay, Colorado Plateau region is world famous, for its Jurassic dinosaurs. Dinosaur National Monument, Jurassic National Monument, the Cleveland Lloyd Quarry there. Now the Hanksville Burpee Quarry is getting a lot of attention down by Hanksville, probably the biggest single dinosaur site in all of North America. Picture 200 dinosaur national monuments laid out end to end. That's what you have at Hanksville Burpee. It's a gigantic site. It is the biggest site on the continent. And it's loaded with skeletons with a similar density of skeletons. So very, very exciting. And then we've also got, of course, the green dinosaur. Los Angeles County Museum's newly unveiled Natalie from down at Blanding, named for all the gnats that were eating them while they excavated this spectacular vanadium-stained dinosaur, which I think is another new species. Everything we find here is new to science. So that's pretty exciting. But the big thing when you're thinking about the Morrison Formation is the general fauna. There's quite a few big meat eaters, allosaurs, ceratosaurs, Torvosaurus is a big megalosaur. Then we have a Tyrannosaurus, Stoxosaurus. We got a few smaller, meat eaters that are hiding and are pretty rare as well. The bipedal plant eaters, Camptosaurus, Eudiodon. And for this talk, you're going to hear a lot about Dryosaurus, the smallest animal on that chart. A couple armored dinosaurs, my favorite, Mimorapelta and Stegosaurus, and a diversity of giant, long-necked dinosaurs, sauropods, that all go extinct at the end of the Jurassic. We have almost a total wipeout of our entire Morrison fauna at the end of the Jurassic. But that'll be another talk for another time. The Fruita Paleo area was discovered a while back. I just had to show this picture just because my old boss, George Callison, painted it. He makes his living as an artist now. He's a professor at Long Beach. But Fruita, Colorado is right there. The Fruita Paleo area is on the other side of the highway. So you can see it in that little map down in the corner. This is where I'd like to have a pointer that work on the screen for you folks. But you can see that map. So it's across the Colorado River, across Interstate 70 from Fruita, Colorado. Now, in 1975, George Callison, as a professor at Cal State Long Beach, came out looking for small fossils. You talk to him now, he was looking for snakes, but he was actually looking for mammals. But he found snakes, the oldest snakes in North America, so that became pretty exciting for him. But the way this whole project started, they knew about a jaw of a large lizard-like animal, sphenodon, called Eilenodon, from the Fruita area. So they decided to go out and see if they could find any other things like that out in the area. And he took his students, Jim Clark, with the pick there, and the guy bent over, Mark Norell out to prospect and look for sites. Jim stopped kind of just past where his head is, bent over, and sat on that little bluff there to tighten up his bootlace. And looking down, he saw some little dots, little dark dots in the white fine sandstone, and it was a string of vertebra from a small crocodilian. And they got real excited. It's an articulated skeleton of something small. And there was only part of it there exposed, but right on the surface, they saw this thing. So they started looking on those horizons, following along laterally to see if there's anything more. And Mark Norell, at the spot where Jim is digging right at the moment, started looking, and he found a cross-section of a little tiny mammal jaw. I mean, we're talking the teeth a couple millimeters tall. You can see the scale that. Those are millimeter breaks in the scale below that little jaw. Very small thing. And cross-section going into the rock. It turns out they also had the skull. They didn't know that for 10 years in the rock. But they knew they had something good. And that started the Fruita Paleo area excavations proper for small vertebrate animals. But Mark Norell, the famous guy, ran the dinosaur program at the American Museum, until very recently. Jim Clark, George Washington University, one of the great experts on early crocodilians. These were undergraduate students at this time, and now are world-famous scientists. I mean, they're both co-leading the Mongolian expeditions of the American Museum back 30 years ago when they went back into Mongolia. Those are the guys that were the main field guys on that project looking for dinosaurs. There's George in his blue shirt there with his hand lens. He always had his hand lens because he's looking for little stuff. And people are sitting there splitting these rocks in the productive level looking for black bits of bone. And it's really fortunate the bone's black and the rock is white, so you can see it. Because some of these things are really small. As you can see there, there's that little curled thing at the bottom. That's a mammal, complete skeleton. It would sit basically under a quarter. Small little skeleton. Very important. They found a second one, and they now know it's an early burrower that's mimicking things like anteaters and things, but is not related to them. But it was copying the burrowing habit among early mammals. Then we have lizard partials and sphenodonid, and there's a nice mammal skull. And there's probably 30 or 40, mammals with 3D skulls. I mean, it's not all flattened things. Incredibly rich site. It's one of the richest sites of its kind anywhere in North America, pretty much anywhere in the world. And fortunately, I was allowed to work there as a grad student. But the FPA, it's a great Morrison fauna. There are dinosaurs, lots of dinosaurs. But there's also the complete ecosystem. there are plant sites, there are fish sites, there are clam sites. And my job was to figure out why we have what we have there and how it all went together in terms of a landscape and why certain things are preserved in different places. And the thing that was really fortunate for me is the beds. If you look at that picture, looking up a thing I named Outlook Hill after an early newspaper reporter that promoted the dinosaurs in the area, you see those horizontal lines through those rocks. Those are flooding events. And because of that, we can correlate all through the area, three-dimensional outcrops, very easily. Someone with a walkie-talkie and they'll, okay, you're on it. And we were driving spikes with different color flags at every one of the levels through the productive interval. That arrow moved. It should be over on the far side of the screen. You can see a little red, I think it's a gas can or something there from one of their jackhammer generators. But that's where the arrow should be pointing. I noticed this running through the slides this afternoon. That moved since I put this together. But they found some eggshell there, and the eggshell was found in the mid-'80s. It was probably the first dinosaur eggshell found in the Morrison Formation. And this is basically the oldest eggshell known in North America still, is from these sites in the Morrison Formation. There's some older eggshells in South Africa from prosauropods, but this is the oldest stuff. And look at the thicknesses, that avian bird-like eggshell, 0.1 to 0.2 millimeters thick. Those are scalotron photographs of thin sections. It's like 1/10 of a millimeter thick. That's some very thin eggshell. I mean, hummingbirds, but it is avian-like eggshell. And there was also turtle eggshell that's 0.5 millimeter thick, very thin. And eggs thin as they're young and developing. They absorb that calcium to help build the bones. So when an egg's ready to hatch, it's much thinner than when it was first laid. So these eggs would have been thicker when they were first laid. How do you study eggs? Best scenarios are what we're famous for, going to Mongolia and finding the dinosaur nests, back in the 1920s, made headlines around the world, and they thought they belonged to Protoceratops, early Ceratopsian, because that was the most common dinosaur in those beds. And they once found an oviraptor, one of these crested, toothless meat-eating dinosaurs, on top of one of those Protoceratops nests. They thought it was stealing the eggs. So oviraptor means egg thief. But now we've got at least 5 examples of oviraptors sitting on the nests. You can see the arms are out to the side. They're probably shading it with their wing feathers, because dinosaurs are feathered, these advanced dinosaurs. So this thing would have had, large feathers. It's probably shading. It was a desert environment. These are buried in sand dunes. So probably during a big sandstorm event, and if any of you have been down around Goblin Valley, as I have, during a big sandstorm, you want to hunker down. So the oviraptors are obviously going over protecting their nests, and the dune collapses and buries them on top of their nests. So that's how we see these things preserved. Why there's 4 examples, or 5 examples, I guess, now, of these things. And we've got oviraptors in eggs. So we know these aren't Protoceratopsian eggs. These are theropod, toothless meat-eating dinosaur protecting its nests at the foot of these sand dunes. And one thing to keep in mind with Protoceratops is the fact that we now think that they did not have hard-shelled eggs. We have found nests of Protoceratops with dozens of babies coming out, not a fragment of eggshell. And as we know, and work is supporting this, that initially dinosaurs did not have shelled eggs. Shelled eggs developed independently in a number of different lines. They developed independently in the bipedal plant eaters, the ornithopods, independently in the meat-eating dinosaurs, the theropods, independently in the large sauropods, the titanosaurs. But before that, eggs were soft-shelled. And they actually have found them preserved now. So they know they were soft-shelled. They're just these little wrinkled things. Eggs don't wrinkle, they break. So that's for sure. The egg, of course, the amnion, the little membrane that surrounds the embryo, or, ammonites, and any of the amnion organisms, reptiles, birds, mammals, have this feature. So it's something that inherits anything that has eggs on land, above amphibians, are linked by having that amnion in the egg construction, or in the mother. Eggshells have different structures. We study these things. You can see a hand I think that's my hand with some pieces of Jurassic eggshell on it. The bumpy parts of the outside of the egg, the smooth parts of the inside of the eggshell. But that's what you generally find, broken pieces of eggshell. And you put them under a scanning electron microscope, you thin section, make microscopic slides, and all the work has to be done microscopically. But eggshell is very distinctive in different morphologies. A good friend of mine who passed now about 30 years, Carl Hirsch, actually shared an office with Carl at the University of Colorado for many years. He was a retired draftsman at Rocky Flats. He was a draftsman where they built the nuclear triggers, where they ended up losing a kilogram of plutonium in the ductwork that they couldn't account for. But he found a fossil egg in Wyoming and started asking me, well, what do I do with this? What is it? What's going on with this? It's certainly an egg, and no one could tell him anything. So he self-taught himself, became the world's expert on fossil eggs, and actually created the science of studying eggshell in a serious manner. And the sweetest man you'd ever want to meet. Carl, magnificent guy. There's a big scholarship program the Western Interior Paleo Society has in his name, and well-deserved. But the whole classification theme on these microscopic structures and how the eggshell goes together was the first models were developed by Carl. The Chinese have gotten into it in a big way as well. But here's some of the modern eggshell types for turtle, geckos. Geckos have independently developed a hard-shelled egg. Other lizards have shop-tail eggs, or viviparous have live young. Snakes, they lay eggs, have soft-shelled eggs. But geckos have developed a hard-shelled egg. We see that in crocodilians. They have a hard-shelled egg. Their ancestors probably didn't. And of course, bird-style eggshell. But the structure, how the egg is constructed, is different in each one of these groups. And to the group, they are taxonomically useful, though we have much to learn still. Here's showing the diversity of eggshell morphology. We can't name them and say this eggshell is Dryosaurus egg. Pretty sure we know what Dryosaurus eggshell looks like because we found a lot of them tied with the skeletons. But we can tell the groups that go with, and there's a whole diversity of these taxa. We name dinosaur tracks by the morphology of the track because we can't associate them with the dinosaur. So you have things like growladder, which is probably a small meat-eating dinosaur track made by things like Coelophysis and Megapnosaurus. We have, and blanking out on Batrachopus, is crocodilian tracks. We have, a variety of these things. We give them ichnotaxa names, and ichno being for trace fossils. Taxa are names we give, scientific names, like we do with species of living animals, for eggshell types. And we know it's just these are place markers, and since biologists came up with the system. But the prismatoolithic types of eggshells seem to go with ornithopods, the bipedal plant eaters. Elongolithus, and that's spelled wrong at the top, I've noticed, not my figure, are for the meat-eating dinosaurs and birds, basically, and there's a variety within that. Then there's a diversity of eggshell morphologies, the spherolithid types of eggs that are tied to the late sauropod eggshell types. And then there's other types that we don't know what they go to. Now, if we look at the sites that we have, these are the Morrison eggshell sites. And I'm not sure, I made this chart up 10 years ago, and I think it still stands, because we did know about the one by Moab then, though there's been a publication since then. But, and Dinosaur National Monument has no eggshell, but it does have baby dinosaurs that seem to be tied to the same pattern of things we're seeing elsewhere. GP's Garden Park, but you see it's kind of Utah and Colorado, western Colorado. Most of the sites are on the Colorado Plateau region. Now, you know, one of the things you say, well, we got 5 kinds of eggshell from the Morrison. Sauropod eggs. These are among the biggest eggs of anything that ever existed, biggest soccer balls, as big as an elephant bird's egg, which is the largest subfossil egg that we know exists. And because of the way eggs are constructed, you know, the air has got to move through pores through the eggshell. So if you make the eggshell too thick, oxygen passing through that shell won't be in enough volume to support the embryo. If the shell, you know, you make a big egg and it's thin, it'll collapse under the weight of the material within the egg. So it really does seem we've hit the boundary between letting oxygen in and the size of an egg is about a soccer ball size egg. That's the biggest you can get. And, you know, maybe, you know, if they figured out a way to pull oxygen in, and there isn't. I don't know how oxygen gets in, passively absorbed by the egg, and CO2 passively leaves the egg. I don't know if this has ever been modeled correctly, but we know it happens because things live and develop in eggs. It has to. But Bacher, well, starting William Diller Matthews, why don't we have any sauropod eggshell? You know, eggshell we have now from sauropods is about a 1/4 inch thick. It's massive. You know, it's as thick as eggshell gets. And we have eggs I showed you, 1 to 2 millimeters thick. We have all these real thin eggs in the Morrison. So you can't say, well, it's too delicate to preserve. This stuff is massive. So we would see it preserved. Diller Matthews thought sauropods were aquatic, the big long-necked dinosaurs. They were too big to walk on land, so they must have been having live birth in the water, like ichthyosaurs. That doesn't make a lot of sense because they're terrestrial animals and probably didn't like being in deep water because they couldn't breathe. They couldn't pull air down those long necks. Bacher acknowledged that they were probably, fully terrestrial. He's got pictures of these things running around deserts with dust devils going on. But his view was they're too large to lay eggs. The young, they only have a few young, and the young were too big for that maximum size you can have an egg. So they had live birth, were viviparous. So here's, his book where he talks about this in some dinosaur heresies. But we have more recently discovered titanosaur eggs. So we know there are sauropod eggs in existence. The eggshell, you see them in the hand. Look how thick those things are. There's no way we should be missing those in the Morrison Formation. In Argentina and whatnot, we see there's sites where there's vast colonial sauropod nesting areas. But I've been doing some research just in the literature tied to giving this talk. And it's like the only eggshell we've got of sauropods are from the Cretaceous and are all titanosaur eggs. So my view is since prosauropods seem to have soft-shelled eggs, that hard-shelled eggs were developed in the Cretaceous titanosaurs, and maybe Bacher is right. The sauropods were viviparous and had live young. We just said, oh, Bob's wrong, He might not be. Or they retained the eggs, and they were hatched internally or soft-shelled eggs, and we're just not seeing them as fossils. But it would seem to me that probably titanosaurs developed shelled eggs independently. So we can't say because they exist, Bacher is wrong. And there are a lot of people that are probably really upset that I say this, but Bob may be right, once again, about something, but maybe not for the right reasons. The first complete eggs found, Garden Park over there by Pueblo, Colorado, Kansas City. The Garden Park area is an incredible fossil area. Ken Carpenter and his team reported a fragment of eggshell in 1987. Later in the same area, they found part of a nest. And these are the eggs that they found, and they seem to be these prismatoolithic eggs. And as we talk about, prismatoolithic eggs, like this construction, seem to be from one taxa. Cleveland Lloyd Quarry at Jurassic Park or Jurassic National Monument. They found an egg at Cleveland Lloyd. Cleveland Lloyd's a mud hole. I mean, this egg was probably aborted. The animal stuck in the mud or something and was in water. You know, you don't lay your eggs in water. You know, and when it's looked at, was seriously examined, it turns out that that egg was pathologic. There were multiple eggshell layers. So this egg was retained, and more eggshell was laid on top of the egg. And this happens. We see this in modern things, where there's a problem and a chicken will lay an egg with multiple layers. Of course, they don't hatch when this happens because the pores don't overlap. So there's no oxygen going into that egg at all. But there's Carl Hirsch and BYU's Wade Miller looking at that first egg. They did a nice paper on it. And once again, it seems to be a prismatic egg, but a pathologic. It's a weird egg, which being laid in a mud hole makes some sense. Now, an area that I spent 9 years of my life excavating, the Mygat Moor Quarry, has produced some really extraordinary things. A lot of big dinosaur bones, some plant, lots of teeth, fish at the top. But I put a lot of energy into this site. It's pretty exciting to work there. Really cut my teeth on working a major dinosaur site at Mygat Moor. But I found 2 eggs in the Mygat Moor Quarry, you know. And this is the larger of the 2 eggs. You see it's not that big. It'd be, you know, about that long, complete. You know, so it's not huge. And Emily Bray, who is an egg expert working under Carl Hirsch, looked at it, and she told me, and she doesn't work on eggs anymore, so I'm really disappointed that it never got published, that it was an eggshell structure she had never seen before. And I found that really interesting. And then the other egg is about half as big. It's only like that big, and seems to be a bird-like structure. So either a meat-eating dinosaur, small one, or a bird. And the size, Archaeopteryx could lay an egg that size, clearly. You know, certainly in that size range. Here's the quarry again. I have the little white ovals at the bottom in the bone bed I threw in for represent the eggs. One big one, one small one. But once again, these are eggs in a mud hole. You know, these would not have been where you'd want to lay the eggs. You know, so these are animals that, you know, were in trouble, you know, probably been attacked or something happened. So they died there, and the egg was preserved in the mud hole. And I think the bigger egg might be the only known egg of an armored dinosaur. I mean, it's likely completely wrong, but, you know, it's an unknown egg, and it's associated with a fairly complete skeleton of a early armored dinosaur I got the pleasure of naming. It's the one Jurassic dinosaur I've named, Morrison, and was in among his bones, which I found real interesting. But we've never found any eggs associated with any armored dinosaurs. And there's certainly no embryonic bones in this. There's no perfect tie to this. So, you know, question mark. But who knows? We don't have stegosaur eggs or any other armored dinosaur eggs. So look at the site again. So now let's go to the young egg site. Yes, you know, yes for the young egg site. This is one of the first real big concentrations of Morrison egg ever found. And then we'll go to the SNS, the Sheets nesting site, and back to the FPA. So here's the young egg site. The stretch section here, the red arrow points to a couple of people there working on the site. It's in the salt wash member of the Morrison. So this is actually the oldest egg site we know of in the Morrison, and probably the oldest egg site in all of North America still, this discovery. But you can see some of the eggshell in the rock in that black and white picture shown there. And I actually went in the parking lot, which is about a quarter mile away, and that's how they found it. You found eggshell in the parking lot, you follow it all the way up to the nest. You know, this thing was reoccupied over and over and over again. Bob Young, a whole bunch of his text vanished. I always like it when they do this stuff to you. It's like, it's on my other copy because I was going over that before this afternoon. It was there. But Bob Young is a geologist. I named a dinosaur for him. He did some really important work in the rocks I studied, the Cedar Mountain Formation, the early Cretaceous. So I named an animal Mirasaurus, Bob Youngeye, well-deserved animal. You know, he fought in World War II. Karl Hirsch, while he was fighting Germans, Karl Hirsch was German, was in a prisoner of war camp in Siberia. So he spent the war. He lost a lot of teeth. That's one of the weirdest bridge work I've ever seen in my life, done in a Russian prisoner of war camp. But Bob really didn't like Karl. You could just tell. He still held a grudge. So they work in the same quarry because Karl's the expert. Bob is not a paleontologist. He's a great stratigrapher. But they didn't get along real good. And oops, now these are appearing. Bachelor's, University of Colorado, PhD, Ohio, professional service. You know, very well-respected scientist. But here's a young egg site. Here's a strat column. This is the description of the rocks going through it. You see the young site is down in the salt wash member of that. That's an old Polaroid from '87 showing Karl jacketing a section of the nesting site. And it was probably a site that was reoccupied maybe for generations. And I think that might really be possible, that generations of these animals might come back and reoccupy the same site. It's a small area. It probably goes for 10 feet laterally total, you know, and just tons of eggshell. Very restricted site. Oh, Karl lifting some of the jackets out of the quarry. This is the type locality of what Karl named as Prismatoolithus coloradoensis. Researchers, Carlo Zielinski and Bill Hill, renamed it as pre-Prismatoolithus, saying they thought it was different enough from Prismatoolithus to be a different genus. But here's the type. It's a pretty complete egg, and the micrograph pictures of the structure of that eggshell. It's the same kind of egg they got at Garden Park in that nest. Now, when we were going through the rocks, I was at the museum. This was before I even worked for Dinobation. And I heard Harley Armstrong yell out, "Whoa, look at this." And they were digging through sacks of dirt from around the nest that they were digging to screen wash to look for small vertebrates. And he pulls the back half of this crocodilian skull out of a bag of dirt that just hacked out of the site as they were going around and make a jacket. Threw it in the bag because they were going to wet screen it to look for teeth and things. And Harley, got to go through this bag. And we went through it just as careful as could be, and we found the front end of the skull as well. So we got a complete skull. So it's a total surprise crocodilian. And it's still an undescribed new taxa, which I'm amazed no one's described it yet. But that's how a lot of this stuff seems to go. You see a close-up teeth. It's got fang teeth. And it's related to something I found later. It was reopened about a decade ago, seemed recently to me. When I gave the talk, it was more recently. And that's Rebecca Hunt Foster, who's the paleontologist now at Dinosaur National Monument, with her daughter Ruby, who's now, I think, getting ready to go to high school next year. And out there, reopened the quarry looking for microvertebrates to screen wash. So I had to throw that in there because Rebecca and I are good friends. Well, the Uravan nesting site was discovered by the director of the Paleontological Museum at Brigham Young University, Rod Sheets. And he discovered it when he was 12 years old. And as with many of us, things happen in your childhood that ruin your life. Because this made him a paleontologist. And one of the sad things is the site seems to have been totally bulldozed by a road that was built through it. So they've never found anything in place. But the dirt on the sides has produced hundreds of bones of baby dinosaurs and eggshell that they've been screen washing. See, they're wet screen washing. And this is him, older, coming back with his kids to work the site. Because he used to be the Paleontologist Museum in Western Colorado before Rebecca got in there and her husband, John Foster. But Rod Has worked that site, found it, years before I ever came out to this part of the world. Here they are screen washing, looking for little bones at the site. They've pretty much completely gone through all the material bulldozed up. They've never found anything in place. So they saved what was there, but who knows what that would have been like if it hadn't been bulldozed. This stuff happens. But here's some of the material. You can see that's the edge of a quarter there by those tiny little vertebrae. Those are baby dinosaur vertebrae. And the material, the leg bones and things from that site are clearly identifiable as Dryosaurus. We used to call it Dryosaurus altus. That's a different taxa. Well, it could be altus. I can't say. It's Dryosaurus. The one that we always think of from Dinosaur National Monument is now Elderi. So they've changed the name. But there's a bunch of the eggshell. There's prismatic, pre-prismatoolithus coloradoensis. And then there's that little tooth, unshed, and there's one in a fragment of a jaw. Those teeth, you can see the size. That's a quarter. So that's as big as Washington's nose on a quarter. So that's a baby. And you look, it's totally unworn tooth. And the tooth in the jaw is completely unworn. So kind of keep that in your mind. But these are babies, and they have exhibits. They've mounted skeletons of this individual. In fact, I'm not sure. No, I don't know if we have a picture. I think they've got a mounted skeleton of one of these down at Thanksgiving Point from his site. But this is the material of Elderi at the Carnegie Museum from the Carnegie Quarry. And as you can see, the baby, skull an inch long. An adult, the skull's about that big. It's not a huge animal, but certainly grows quite a bit from the babies we have up into its adult body size. It'd be about 10 foot, maybe a big one would be 12 foot long. So 3-4 meters max. But one of the critical things from the site that'll be more important when you see what I talk about next is that the site has two size classes. There's bigger animals, there's still juveniles, clearly, that I think of as yearlings. This animal's about a year old. They grew to probably 3 to 4 foot long, around a meter long, maybe a meter and a half long body size. No adults, but animals that big, and babies. Little bitty babies that would have just hatched out of the eggs. So we have these two size classes in the same site, and that's it. And they're probably two different generations of animals. Okay, let's go over to the Fruitachampsa, FPA. Now, Fruitachampsa is remarkable because of the marker beds. There are flood deposits, and we could trace them through the whole region. In this picture, I'm standing on a river channel, and there's a levee. And levees are deposits that form on the sides of river channels during floods. Whereas the river leaves the channel, it dumps part of the heavy load on the sides of the channel. And we can follow those levee beds right in to those white hard beds in that white level to the side going toward the main quarry. And each one of those is a flood event we can track back to the channel I'm standing on in this picture. And from this, and from looking at other channels, if you look way back behind the word main, there's another pond deposit there, and the channel it's related to is right under it, that sandstone right under it. But we've been able to map all these river channels and associated environments on the floodplain. And because of this, in my mind, this is some of what I consider the best work I've done in my whole career. This is probably the best understood square mile or square kilometer, depending on what you want to use, same neighborhood, of Morrison floodplain at several levels. We can just map through this history of this place anywhere in the Morrison Formation. There's a lot of good sites we know a lot about, but we have no site where we have this kind of three-dimensional, absolutely know these were happening at the same time type of environments. So this is looking over below Outlook Hill, and even though this isn't by the nest, it's actually in the opposite direction from where I was standing, looking down at the main quarry. This is actually looking from the main quarry to Outlook Hill. And you can see how these marker beds can be tracked around. But that red star is a site I found 2 flood beds below the main quarry marker bed. And I got the channel, I call it the Fruita Croc channel, because in that site we found some crocodilian material. That's pretty exciting, but it's a bone bed. I trench sections so I can look at the rock. And I'm sweeping it with my brush, cleaning it so I can describe it real carefully. And I'm looking at the rock I just cleaned and saw this with the question mark. All these black bits of bone. It's like, I've got something. And if you look at the top above the question mark, you'll see this thing with teeth and coming out of the rock there. And it's like, there's something nice here. And we excavated that site quite a bit, as you can see. And in that quarry is where the holotype skull of Fruitachampsa callisoni was found. And Jim Clark, who you saw very early on in this talk, who found the initial Fruita main quarry area because of tying his bootlace up, found that string of crocverts, probably from the same animal, same kind of animal. He described this and named it for George Callison. So this is Fruitachampsa callisoni, and it's a little terrestrial croc. It's got little fang teeth, very heterodont dentition, which means different tooth, and probably filled the role of, in modern world, would be filled by raccoons and skunks. So your small quadrupedal predators running around the landscape, looking for things, maybe a bit more nocturnal with the dinosaurs out diurnally. Here's a reconstruction of it at the Museum of Western Colorado, and you can see those fang teeth. So when it laid into you, even though the head's only this long, it'd hold on pretty good. And it was, look at those long legs. It was highly mobile, very speedy little animal, was not aquatic. We nicknamed them bunny crocs, since they were so lightly built. And they're a major part of the Morrison ecosystem. People say, where are all the small meat eaters? Well, a lot of them are replaced by little terrestrial crocodilians, of which there's probably 6 kinds of these little crocodilians. If we look at these rocks, the Callison quarries are low in the brushy basin. There's a thing that's a marker through the region, through the whole Plateau region, that we call the clay change, where we go from non-swelling elytic clays below to these puffy swelling clays above that are produced from the breakdown of volcanic ash. And it's a dramatic change. It's like, boom, the clay change. And it's like, oh, the volcanoes, the switch went on and all the volcanoes started going. Well, when we look at the data, Maureen Steiner, she was doing paleomagnetics near the Four Corners region in these rocks, and she found the lower part of the Morrison and the upper part of the Morrison, when you did paleomagnetics, have 2 different clouds of poles. So when you do paleomagnetics, you find a pole. And of course, we're not looking at reversals, just where is the pole? Sometimes the north, sometimes the south, but the pole's in the northern hemisphere. And the lower part, they're all in this area. This part, they're all here. They're not overlapping whatsoever. And if that had been a continuous record, that should have blended from one end to the other. So it suggests very strongly that we have a break that I named in a paper now 5 years ago, the J7 unconformity. That's at the base at the clay change. And this fizzles out as you go into like Wyoming. This is a southern thing. All these unconformities, these breaks in time that we have in the Upper Jurassic fade to the north. And, they're not universal. People, they're everywhere. We should find this in England. No. You should find it in northern Wyoming. No. This is Colorado Plateau. It's a Utah thing and a western Colorado thing. But it's a good marker bed. Here's the clay change. There's a soil horizon associated with it that's very significant, that helps represent there was time involved in that surface. And we're out looking in the early 90s. I found some bones in this area below the clay change, which makes it interesting. And I brought my intern, this undergraduate student who grew up or had grandparents in Grand Junction. And I was talking to taking him on as an intern. And he came out with me, And he found around the corner from where my stuff was, which is turtles, some little bones of baby dinosaurs. And his name was Randy Needham. And that's Dr. Randy Needham. He's one of the world's expert on Jurassic lizards and early Cretaceous lizards. I was the one that said you should study lizards because no one's doing it. So there may be a job. But he teaches anatomy to nurses. But they give him, he has a nice paleo lab there too, down in Phoenix. There's 7 paleontologists there that teach nursing students of various sorts. That's one of the main jobs of your paleontologist is teaching medical students, because doctors make more money as doctors. But if you teach gross anatomy, you make all right money. This is looking at the site. It's just this slope, mud. You look at the rock hammerhead, and near it you can see some bones. What's that echo from? What? Oh. But you see those kind of yellowish objects? Those are juvenile dinosaur bones. The babies are small enough that you're really not going to make them out in that picture. But that surface is covered in baby dinosaur bones. Hundreds of them. We basically did a little test excavation just to, how big is this thing? And at the time, in the 90s, my view was, well, let's get Rod Sheets, who was, in the area, let Rod work on it because he works on baby dinosaur, Dryosaurus nesting, and we knew we had Dryosaurus bones. So let him work on this site too. And it never happened. He never did anything on the site. So the site is still there, but we figured out its geometry pretty well, and it's very accessible. But when, we found out that we have, multiple uses of the same nest. There's clearly too many bones there for one hatching. And then once again, we have 2 size classes. We have yearlings and we have babies in the site. And we've got some eggshell, which is pretty interesting. The baby material is some of the baby, that gray bone on the far side by the quarter label. That's actually probably a juvenile toe bone. But at the time, I threw it in with the baby bones. But there are various limb bones and whatnot. And look at that little tooth off of Lincoln's nose, and you compare it to the size of the one by George Washington's nose. But what's interesting is those teeth are worn. You see, it's beveled off. And it's an upper tooth, where the one by Washington's nose is a dentary tooth. It's a lower tooth. And it's basically, I've been told that, yeah, they can wear them. Jack Horner works on nesting sites in the late Cretaceous. These things apparently will grind their teeth to get them so they actually would work better in the egg. So they're actually usually hatching with some normal wear that makes the teeth work better, which I found interesting. So these teeth are slightly worn. They're very tiny, though. And once again, 2 size classes. We have juveniles and babies. And the thing that was driving me nuts was, why would we have yearlings dead in the nesting site? And lots of them. I mean, it's not like, more babies, but there are a lot of juveniles. Why are they in the site? And one of the theories I came up with, it may not be right, we need more science. Keep doing the science, honing our theories, particularly this kind of work. Storytelling with data support the stories. But I figure these things, when they hatch, are following the adults like ducklings and mimicking the adult. So the adult would pick on something to eat. The young would do that. Because there's no evidence that they're feeding their young. They're hatching. We've got young that are almost certainly, partial eggs with animals folded up still. And the legs are totally folded up against each other. So it's like, yeah, that's probably part of an egg and the animal in it. And so we're seeing these babies are growing up and they're precocial. They can walk immediately. The hadrosaurs up in Montana, when they hatch, the joints aren't well developed. So they're probably nest bound for a period of time requiring feeding. But these things probably, I think, were following the adults, tagging along and pecking with the adults, just mimicry. There was no big lessons. Now, the one with the 3 leaves is poisonous. The one with the 2 leaves is edible. None of that. They just peck on this, food. Don't ignore the other stuff. Just peck on what we peck on. And if they learn the lesson, peck on the right things, they live. They have a lot of young, You don't get it, sorry, you don't make it. But that's my theory. But what I think's happening, they come back, follow the parent all the way back to the nest the next year. And the parent, basically doesn't eat when it's nesting. And these young starve to death, waiting to be led to food. Other ones wander off and they succeed. But the ones that are dying on the nesting sites are the ones that, get out of the house, kid. Go get a job. We're basically the ones that didn't go out of the house and get a job. But that's a theory. It's not a fact. We've had a number of important scientists visit the site with me over the years. That's at the SVP field trip that I swung through there. For the Canadians, when we give the talk, Don Brinkman, beloved Canadian paleontologist. Of course, Bob Bacher, the infamous Bob Bacher. And up north, up above, Dave Norman, Cambridge University, one of the world's experts on iguanodonts, and a friend of mine for many years, since I work early Cretaceous as well. We also found the quarry vertebra of little tiny crocodilians. And if you look, the dinosaur vertebrae are flat on both ends. They're not complicated. But we have a Pistocelas vertebra, we have a socket and a ball articulation. That's a crocodilian type of vertebra. Also notice the neural arch is on those. If you look at the other pictures, in these pictures, all we have is centra. And the neural arch fuses on as they get older. So this is showing those little crocodilians are adults. And we got 2 nesting sites, with this pattern of juveniles and babies. And then both of them have these little bunny crocs associated with the nests. Why would that be? And my theory on that is they're nest thieves. And this is a painting Mike Skrepnik did for me back in '93, showing Fruitachampsid, like crocodilian, a bunny croc, running away from a nest with an angry Dryosaurus wanting to stomp its head in. On occasion they did, which is why we get some of these dead crocodilians preserved in these nesting sites. But we have this ongoing pattern. The predator, the egg thief, and the dinosaur trying to protect the nest. If you look at Nile crocodiles today, varanid lizards, monitor lizards are always raiding crocodile nests. So you get similar patterns. Raccoons digging up sea turtle nests. Eggs are very nutritious. There's a lot of animals that pay very much attention to where things nest. In terms of the crocodilian, is what kind of croc is it? Because we're looking below the clay change. We're down in more of a salt wash facies, which is a bit older. It's not vastly older. It's all Kimmeridgian, the same stage of the late Jurassic. But there is a gap there. And we do see different allosaurs in the sol rock. Jim Madsen is in the lower part. Virgilis is in the upper. Gargoylosaurus is in the lower part. Mymorpelta is in the upper part. So we have differences in the dinosaurs at different levels. So maybe they're different crocs stratigraphically. But when you look at these things together, they're about the same size, and they're not the same taxa. Everyone agrees they are not the same, but they're clearly related to each other, these little bunny crocs. And, and it's a Dryosaurus, the same above and below the clay change. We have stuff above the clay change, we have stuff below the clay change. What Dryosaurus? Dryosaurus elderi is above the clay change. Are these Dryosaurus altus that we're finding down there, or another species? This work has not been done. And do for sure Prismatolithus coloradoensis eggs belong to Dryosaurus. I think the data is pretty strong that they do. But it's not absolutely conclusive. And, the nest is still out there. I've been bugging the paleontologists in the Museum of West Colorado, go dig it up. It's only this big across. Just make a big jacket around it, bring it to the lab, set up a microscope, boom over it, and then under a microscope, tease out that nest and figure out what's going on, because it's an intact nest. of eggs. And it's still sitting out there, and hopefully someday someone will do it. But there's a lot of research to be done. Recently, there's a nesting site north of Moab that's in Utah Raptor State Park that's been published on, but they are mainly reporting on organic material associated with the eggshell itself, not so much on behavior stuff, which kind of more interesting to me. But we see a pattern. The Jurassic nests, 150 million years old. They're solitary nesters, apparently. They're going back to the same nesting site year after year after year, maybe even generation on generation, for all we know. The hatchlings seem to be precocial. They hatch from the eggs and are able to leave the nest immediately. The nest raiders are clearly terrestrial crocodilians, which they're a major part of that fauna. The juveniles seem to follow the adults up to a year, as we find remains of babies and yearlings at the nest. If we look at the hadrosaur nests, the stuff that Jack Horner's worked on, Don Brinkman, the stuff from Montana, Alberta, that are 70 million years old. Look at those sites. Basically, they're colonial nesters. We see lots of nests at the same level, both of the Alberta stuff, different taxa, these nesting sites. So they're colonial nesters. They seem to be nice fidelity that nests are being reoccupied, but are by the same animal or not. Who knows? The young seem to be nest-bound. Their limb bone joints aren't well developed when they're hatching, so they're being in the nest, probably being fed by the adult. The nest raiders, instead of being crocodilians, are probably varanid lizards and small meat-eating animals like troodontids, probably raiding the nests. Care for young, certainly, I think mimicry for Dryosaurus, not direct care and feeding. And basically we get the remains of babies in the nests, not this two-class system of young. So basically, we see some real differences between our 150 million year old nests and those that are approximately 80 million years, half the age. In the late Cretaceous, you would expect to see differences. Hadrosaurs are very derived ornithopods, bipedal plant eaters, where Dryosauruses are at the very bottom of the iguanodonts, the group that gives rise to hadrosaurs later. So you expect to see more basal levels, more basal types of behaviors, at least what we as humans think is more basal care. And taking care of young is a good thing. So we tend to look at it anthropomorphically. Can't help it, like kids. But basically, we're seeing some real patterns. And remember, someday, dawn of the Cretaceous, Fossil Beds National Monument will happen, but not for a few years, most likely. Anyway, thank you very much.